It's crossover Thursday, Locked On Broncos, Locked On Colts. Want to say once again, thank you to all you everydayers that make Locked On Broncos, Locked On Colts your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much for rocking with us. You know, we got you covered anything that happens with the Broncos and the Colts all year long. Jake, let's talk about this because obviously it's not win or go home just yet, obviously. But I mean, the stakes feel like that, right? It kind of feels like, man, a loss would be just deflating for either of these two teams. Even though the Broncos are at 8-5 right now, this team has been collapsing, you know, in the opportunities that they've gotten even over the last 8 years. So what do the Colts have to do in order to win this game? What are your keys to victory this week?
Yeah, so luckily for the Colts, they're facing the number one sack defense in the league, but Anthony Richardson, arguably the best trait he has is sack avoidance. He's able to get out of those so seamlessly. We've seen what it was when Joe Flacco was back there. It's night and day. You have a sitting duck in Joe Flacco versus a guy who is able to escape just about anything with Richardson. So I think that'll be huge. That'll allow him to buy a little more time to find Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, maybe Michael Pittman Jr. in this. But the Colts have had this bye week to look at, that you mentioned Levi Wallace, Chris Abrams drain. Have they found something they think they can really exploit? I don't think if the Colts are going to win this, I don't think it's going to be like a ugly, low scoring thing. They're probably going to have to trade shots a little bit like the Browns game. That was kind of exciting, but like you mentioned, didn't need to be that close. But with a defense like this, I think the Colts do have an X factor, and that's a slot receiver in Josh Downs, who I think could be a bit of a zone buster. And then they've got Anthony Richardson, who can avoid those sacks. I don't love him. I favor him a little bit more going into more man coverage schemes than zone. So that gives me a little bit of pause for him as a passer. But unfortunately, I think this is just going to have to be a game where he really, really rises to the occasion. I don't think they're going to be able to afford a stinker from him. But like I mentioned, they have to raise their level with him. You can't have pass catchers that are out there not running routes to the right depth or not turning their heads in time or not just flat out not catching passes. You just cannot shoot yourselves in the foot because, again, this is the biggest game of the year. They lose this and it's probably over. You're not going to be able to come back from 3 games down with 4 games left. Doesn't make sense. So this is a must win. I mean, everyone has got to be on their P's and Q's or the season's pretty much over.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that, obviously, and unfortunately, that's kind of how Broncos fans are thinking as well right now. Because you look at the Colts' final 3 games after this game, right, and you think about, okay, if they beat the Broncos, like they've got a pretty good shot against the Giants and the I think it's the Jags and the Titans. I don't know what the order is there, but I mean, you feel like they've got a pretty good shot to maybe run the table there. For the Broncos, you're playing the Colts, and then you have a short week against the Chargers. Then you play the Cincinnati Bengals, and then you play the Kansas City Chiefs in the final week of the season. So you're kind of sitting there thinking, man, you lose this game. Do you win the rest of the, like, how badly would this deflate your playoff hopes? And so, of course, both of these teams, they're trying to get back to the postseason. The Broncos haven't been since they won Super Bowl 50. If they're going to win this game, number one, got to shut down the big play for the Colts passing attack. Obviously, that was a huge problem and a huge issue when it came to their game against the Cleveland Browns, even though they ended up winning, getting 2 pick sixes in that game. Thankfully for that. Otherwise, it would have been disastrous. The Broncos, number 2, they got to capitalize on red zone appearances. Too many times against the Browns and in the last handful of weeks, too many times just settling for 3 points instead of being able to punch the ball in. Got to be able to convert on the money downs when you get down into the red area. And then keep feeding the young guys is my number 3 key to victory here, Jake, because we see the Broncos after the trade deadline. They did nothing at the trade deadline. Everybody was kind of upset about that because you're like, well, do you really want Bo Nix to succeed as a rookie? Like, the guys around him stink. Well, since the trade deadline, they've started to get Marvin Mims more involved, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Cortland Sutton is playing well. Involving the young guys, especially I think running back Audric Estime this week, is going to be key for the Denver Broncos getting a win against the Indianapolis Colts. And as we've been discussing, the stakes are extremely high. And if you can get those young guys with a head of steam, just all confidence, full go ahead, you could maybe make some noise here in the postseason.
Yeah, you mentioned Audric Estime, and I was not a fan of you mentioning that because it makes me go and think of, Tank Bigsby from the Jaguars, for example. Guys who are powerful and can just rip through arm tackles and stuff. That's a recipe for disaster. I mean, Estime could come out of nowhere to run for over 100 in that instance if they fed him the ball. But no, that would be a pretty tough matchup for the Colts. But it's all, I feel like it's corny coach speak, but like offensive and defensively, it's all about being where you're supposed to be and just executing at the basic level and just let special things come from there. But it's all about just doing your job in this one, because at least in that way, you're not having so many self-inflicted wounds, and that's really plagued the Colts this year. I think this is a very tough matchup overall. I think there's an avenue for the Colts to win if they do some of those things we've discussed. But yeah, it's you really want to see how both of these teams respond after a bye week. This is only the second year of Shane Steichen, so I don't think there's not enough data there to know what it looks like post bye week. Especially with Anthony Richardson as his quarterback, but hoping for some positive things.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, look, it's two teams fighting for playoff spots with young quarterbacks. The Colts got theirs last year. Broncos got theirs this year. I think Broncos country, Colts fans got a lot to be excited about no matter what, especially with the way Richardson has been, like you said, a couple game-winning drives in the last handful of weeks here. Bo Nix been doing the same, been making some clutch plays for the Broncos. So it's exciting times for both of these teams, and we'll see what happens on Sunday.